She was just trying to calm a terrified little girl with soap bubbles in her empty diner at 3 a.m. What the waitress didn't know was that the child's father, watching from the shadows, was the most powerful vampire king alive, and he'd just decided she belonged to him. If you want to hear more stories like this, subscribe to the channel right now and tell me in the comments, where are you listening to this story from? The clock above Mel's diner read 2:47 a.m. when Emma Rodriguez wiped down the same coffee-stained counter for the 3rd time that hour. Rain hammered against the windows of the roadside diner like bullets, and the fluorescent lights flickered with that eerie rhythm that always made her skin crawl during the graveyard shift. Only 2 customers remained in the whole place. Old Frank nursing his black coffee at table 6, and a trucker named Billy, who'd been staring at his untouched pie for 20 minutes like it held the secrets of the universe. Emma tucked a strand of dark hair behind her ear and sighed. 3 years of late shifts at this forgotten stretch of highway between nowhere and nothing, and she still couldn't get used to the oppressive quiet that settled over the place after midnight. The diner felt like a ship adrift in an ocean of darkness, with only the occasional 18-wheeler's headlights cutting through the gloom before disappearing into the storm. She was reaching for the coffee pot to give Frank his 4th refill when the front door exploded open. A small figure stumbled inside, soaked to the bone and shaking like a leaf in a hurricane. Emma's breath caught in her throat. It was a little girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, with platinum blonde hair plastered to her impossibly pale face. Her clothes, a white dress that looked expensive despite being torn and muddy, clung to her tiny frame, but it was her eyes that made Emma's heart skip a beat. They were the palest blue she'd ever seen, almost silver, and filled with a terror so deep it seemed ancient, like the child had witnessed horrors that shouldn't exist in this world. The girl stood in the doorway, water pooling at her bare feet, not making a sound, just staring with those haunting eyes. Frank's coffee cup clattered against its saucer. Jesus Christ, where did she come from? Billy pushed back from his table, his chair scraping against the linoleum. Kid looks half dead. Should we call someone? Emma moved around the counter slowly, the way you'd approach a wounded animal. Something about the child made her skin prickle with unease, but not fear, protective instinct. The girl's lips were tinged blue, and her small hands trembled as they clutched at her dress. "Hey there, sweetheart," Emma said softly, kneeling down to the girl's eye level. "Are you okay? Are you hurt?" The child's silver eyes locked onto Emma's brown ones, but she didn't speak. Didn't even seem to breathe. "Where are your parents, honey?" Emma tried again, reaching out slowly. "Did someone hurt you?" The moment Emma's fingers touched the girl's ice-cold hand, the child flinched violently and let out a sound that made everyone in the diner freeze. It wasn't quite a scream. It was something primal, inhuman, like a wounded animal caught in a trap. The fluorescent lights above them flickered more violently, and Frank's coffee mug shattered on the floor. "What the hell?" Billy started, but Emma shot him a sharp look. The girl's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Only that terrible, silent scream of panic. Her whole body shook now, and Emma realized with growing alarm that the child was having some kind of breakdown. Emma's mind raced. She'd seen trauma before. Her younger brother had panic attacks after their father left, but this felt different, deeper, like the girl had witnessed something no child should ever see. Without thinking, Emma reached into her apron pocket and pulled out something that had gotten her through countless boring late-night shifts. A small bottle of bubble solution with a tiny wand attached to the cap. "Look at this, baby girl," Emma whispered, unscrewing the bottle. "Watch." She dipped the plastic wand into the soapy solution and blew gently. A stream of iridescent bubbles floated through the air, catching the diner's harsh fluorescent light and transforming it into something magical. They drifted around the girl's face like tiny rainbow planets, popping softly against her cheeks and hair. The change was instant and startling. The girl's panicked breathing slowed. Her silver eyes widened with wonder instead of terror, and she lifted one trembling hand to touch a bubble before it burst against her palm. A ghost of a smile crossed her lips, the first sign of humanity Emma had seen from her. "Pretty, aren't they?" Emma blew another batch, and the girl actually stepped closer, her bare feet silent on the wet floor. My mom used to make these for me when I was scared. She said they carried wishes up to heaven. The girl reached for more bubbles, her movements becoming less frantic, more childlike. She was still pale as moonlight and cold as winter, but the raw terror had faded from her eyes. Emma kept blowing bubbles, creating a small cloud of shimmering spheres that seemed to glow in the diner's harsh lighting. That's when the temperature dropped 20 degrees in an instant. Emma's breath misted in front of her face. The windows fogged over completely, and every single light in the diner flickered once, twice, then went out entirely. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in an eerie red glow. What Emma didn't see was the figure standing in the darkness outside the diner windows. A man, impossibly tall and still, watching through the rain-streaked glass with eyes that glowed silver in the night. His lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile as he watched the human woman blow bubbles for his daughter. Lord Cale Draven had been searching for Lyra for 3 hours, tearing through the countryside with his guards in a desperate hunt. And now he'd found her, in the arms of a human waitress who'd done what no one had managed in 3 years. She'd made his daughter smile. The Vampire King's eyes narrowed as he studied Emma Rodriguez. Brown hair, tired eyes, cheap uniform. Nothing special. Nothing remarkable. Just another human living a forgettable life in a forgettable place. And yet, his daughter, traumatized, broken, unable to trust even him sometimes, clung to this woman like she was salvation itself. Cale's decision was made in that instant, absolute and unbreakable. The waitress was coming with him, whether she wanted to or not. The front door opened with a soft chime that sounded like a funeral bell in the oppressive silence. A man stepped inside, and Emma's heart nearly stopped beating altogether. He had to be at least 6.5 feet tall, with shoulders broad enough to block out the emergency lighting behind him. His hair was black as midnight, and swept back from a face that looked like it had been carved from marble by a master sculptor. All sharp angles and classical beauty that belonged in a museum, not a roadside diner. But it was his eyes that made Emma's knees weak. They were the same pale silver as the little girl's, but ancient in a way that spoke of centuries, not years. He wore a long black coat that looked like it cost more than Emma made in 6 months, and despite the torrential rain outside, it didn't have a single drop of water on it. When he moved, it was with a predatory grace that made Emma's instincts scream danger. The man's silver gaze swept across the diner, taking in Frank cowering by his table, Billy pressed against the back wall, and finally settling on Emma and the little girl. When his eyes locked onto Emma's, she felt something shift in the air around them, like the moment before lightning strikes. "Who?" he said, his voice carrying a faint European accent and a coldness that made the temperature drop another 10 degrees. "Has been touching my daughter?" Silence crashed down on the diner like a suffocating blanket. Emma could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears, could feel the little girl's icy fingers tightening around her hand with desperate strength. Behind the man, Emma could see more figures filing silently into the parking lot through the rain. They moved with that same unnatural grace, spreading out to surround the building like pieces on a chessboard. Every exit, every escape route, was being systematically blocked. "I asked a question," the man said, stepping further into the diner. His boots made no sound on the linoleum floor. "And I expect an answer." His silver eyes swept over Frank, who immediately pointed a shaking finger at Emma. "Her! She's the one who was talking to the kid." "Frank!" Emma gasped, but she couldn't blame him. Terror had a way of turning people into cowards. The man's attention focused on Emma like a laser, and she felt exposed, vulnerable, as if he could see straight through to her soul. Those ancient eyes catalogued everything. Her rumpled uniform, her work-worn hands, the way she instinctively moved to shield the little girl behind her. "You touched what belongs to me," he said, his voice soft as velvet and twice as deadly. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Emma's fear spiked, but underneath it, anger began to burn. This child had been terrified. Alone. Soaked to the bone in the middle of the night. What kind of father let that happen? "She was scared," Emma said, her voice trembling but determined. "She was just a little girl who needed help. I wasn't going to hurt her. Something flickered across the man's perfect features. Surprise, maybe, that she'd found the courage to speak at all. Help? The word came out like he'd never heard it before. You think you were helping her? Emma's protective instincts overrode her terror. She's terrified. She's freezing. She can't even speak. What was I supposed to do? Just ignore her? The man took another step closer, and Emma could smell something on him. Not cologne, but something wilder, more primal, like winter forests and old blood. You have no idea what she is. What I am. You've interfered with forces beyond your comprehension, little human. Human. The way he said it made Emma's skin crawl, like she was a different species altogether. I don't care what you are, Emma said, surprising herself with her boldness. She's just a child. That's when the little girl did something that shocked everyone in the room, including her father. She let go of Emma's hand and stepped forward, wrapping her small arms around Emma's leg in a fierce hug. Her silver eyes, no longer blank with terror, looked up at Emma with something that might have been gratitude or affection. Or both. The man froze. For the first time since he'd entered the diner, his composure cracked. Emma watched emotions flicker across his marble features. Confusion, disbelief, and something that might have been wonder. Lyra. His voice was different now, softer, almost vulnerable. Daughter. The little girl, Lyra, turned to look at her father, but she didn't let go of Emma's leg. Instead, she reached out with one small hand, making a gesture Emma didn't understand, but that clearly meant something to him. The man's silver eyes widened. He took a step back, as if his daughter had physically pushed him. That's impossible, he whispered. What? Emma asked, looking down at Lyra, who now clung to her with both arms. What's impossible? The man stared at his daughter for a long moment, something shifting in those ancient eyes. When he looked back at Emma, the deadly coldness was still there, but underneath it was something else. Curiosity, perhaps, or calculation. She hasn't spoken to anyone in 3 years, he said quietly. Hasn't touched anyone. Hasn't trusted anyone. His gaze settled on Emma's face with new intensity. Until you. Emma felt a chill that had nothing to do with the supernatural cold filling the diner. What are you talking about? Instead of answering, the man stepped closer until Emma could see her own reflection in his silver eyes. What's your name, human? Emma, she whispered, hating how small her voice sounded. Emma. He said her name like he was tasting it, claiming it. You will come with me. What? No. I can't just leave. I have a job. I have a life. You have nothing, he said with absolute certainty. No family, no real friends. No one who would miss you if you disappeared tonight. His smile was sharp as a blade. Don't look so shocked. I know everything about everyone in this pathetic little town. Emma's blood ran cold, because he was right. Completely, devastatingly right. My daughter has chosen you, he continued, his voice carrying the weight of a royal decree. Therefore you will come with me. You will care for her. You will give her whatever comfort she seems to find in your presence. And if I refuse, his smile became something truly terrifying. All predator, no humanity. Then you won't live to regret the decision. Before Emma could protest further, Lyra tugged on her hand and pointed toward the door. The little girl's silver eyes held a plea that Emma couldn't ignore, even if she wanted to. The man gestured, and 2 of his companions entered the diner. They moved like shadows, flanking Emma but not quite touching her. Gentlemen, escort our guest to the car. Wait. Emma tried to pull away, but Lyra held tight to her hand. I don't even know who you are. The man paused at the door, his black coat billowing around him like wings. When he turned back, his smile was all sharp edges and ancient power. Lord Cale Dreven, he said with a slight bow that somehow managed to be mocking. And you, Emma Rodriguez, are about to discover that your simple little life has just become infinitely more complicated. The last thing Emma saw as she was swept out into the storm was Frank and Billy's terrified faces, watching through the fogged windows. And then she was being guided toward a sleek black car that looked like it belonged in a movie about international assassins. The night swallowed them whole. The car ride felt like a descent into hell. Emma sat in the back seat between 2 of Cale's men, their presence as cold and oppressive as tombstones. They didn't breathe. She was sure of it. She'd been watching for 20 minutes, and neither of their chests had risen or fallen once. Lyra sat across from her next to Cale, those silver eyes never leaving Emma's face, as if she feared Emma might disappear if she looked away. The landscape outside the tinted windows grew wilder and more desolate with each passing mile. They'd left the highway far behind, winding through increasingly narrow roads that seemed carved from the very darkness itself. Ancient trees pressed close on either side, their gnarled branches creating a canopy so thick that even the storm's lightning couldn't penetrate it. "Where are you taking me?" Emma finally managed to whisper. Cale didn't look up from the tablet he'd been scrolling through. "Home. That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting." After what felt like hours, the trees finally parted to reveal something that made Emma's breath catch in her throat. The Draven estate rose from the landscape like a Gothic cathedral built by fallen angels. It was massive, easily the size of a small hotel, with towering spires that disappeared into the storm clouds above. Every window glowed with warm golden light, but instead of appearing welcoming, it looked like the eyes of some great beast watching their approach. Gargoyles perched on the corners of the building, their stone faces twisted in eternal screams. "Jesus," Emma breathed. "He has no power here," Cale said without looking up. The car pulled up to a circular drive made of black stone that reflected the lightning like obsidian. As soon as the engine died, figures began emerging from the estate's entrance. They moved in perfect synchronization, forming two lines that led to the massive front doors. "Servants," Cale explained, finally putting away his tablet. "They've been eager to meet the woman who calmed my daughter." Emma watched through the window as more figures appeared, at least 20 of them now, all dressed in dark formal wear that looked like it belonged to another century. But it was their eyes that made her stomach clench with fear. Every single one of them glowed with unnatural light. Amber, silver, deep red like fresh blood. "They're like you," Emma said, her voice barely audible. "Vampires," Cale confirmed casually, as if he was discussing the weather. "The oldest and most loyal of my bloodline. Some have served my family for centuries. Vampires." The word hit Emma like a physical blow. Part of her had suspected, but hearing it confirmed made everything real in a way that terrified her. These weren't just dangerous people. They were predators who fed on human blood. The car door opened, and one of Cale's men gestured for her to exit. Emma's legs felt like jelly as she stepped onto the black stone, Lyra immediately taking her hand. The moment her feet touched the ground, every single servant dropped into a deep bow. "My lord," they spoke in unison, their voices creating an eerie harmony that echoed off the estate's walls. "Welcome home." Cale strode past them without acknowledgement, but Emma noticed how their glowing eyes tracked his every movement, with something that looked like worship. He paused at the entrance, a doorway easily 12 feet tall and carved with symbols that hurt to look at directly. "Emma Rodriguez," his voice carried across the courtyard. "Welcome to Raven's Halt." The interior was even more overwhelming than the exterior. The entrance hall soared 3 stories high, with a chandelier made of what looked like black crystal casting dancing shadows on the walls. Oil paintings of severe-looking individuals with those same silver eyes lined the corridors, and Emma realized she was looking at generations of Cale's family. All of them had that same ageless, predatory beauty. "The Draven bloodline," Cale said, noticing her stare. "We've ruled this territory for over 800 years. Territory? Everything within a 50-mile radius belongs to me. Every human, every business, every breath of air." His smile was sharp. "Including you now." They walked through corridors lined with tapestries that depicted hunting scenes, though Emma had the sickening suspicion the prey in those images wasn't animals. Servants appeared and disappeared like ghosts, always bowing when they passed Kyle, always watching Emma with curious, glowing eyes. Finally, they entered what looked like a library that belonged in a European castle. Floor-to-ceiling shelves filled with ancient books surrounded a fireplace large enough to stand in. Kyle gestured for Emma to sit in a leather chair that probably cost more than her car. "Do you know why my daughter was in your diner tonight?" Kyle asked, settling into the chair across from her. Lyra climbed onto Emma's lap without hesitation, curling up like a small cat. "No. She was fleeing from here. From me. from the safety I've spent years building around her. His silver eyes grew distant. 3 years ago, Lyra witnessed something that broke her mind. She hasn't spoken since. Hasn't allowed anyone to touch her. She screams if anyone but me comes near her. Emma looked down at the little girl in her arms, who was now playing with a loose thread on Emma's uniform. What did she see? Her mother's murder. The words hit Emma like ice water. She tightened her arms around Lyra protectively, understanding now why the child carried such deep trauma. Lyra is not just my daughter, Cale continued, his voice growing harder. She is the heir to the Draven bloodline, a princess among vampires. And there are those who would use her to destroy everything I've built. That's why she ran. She sensed danger. Her vampire instincts are strong, even if her mind is fractured. Kyle leaned forward, his eyes burning into Emma's. But you calmed her. For the first time in 3 years, she trusts someone besides me. That makes you invaluable. Emma felt the trap closing around her. What do you want from me? You will stay here. You will care for Lyra. Comfort her. Help her heal. You will be whatever she needs you to be. Kyle's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. In return, you will live in luxury beyond your imagination. And if I refuse? Kyle stood, his imposing frame casting long shadows in the fireplace light. When he spoke, his voice dropped to a whisper that somehow felt more threatening than any shout. You won't refuse, Emma, because you've already seen what Lyra becomes without you. A broken, terrified child lost in her own mind. And because deep down, you know you have nowhere else to go. He moved toward the door, then paused. Your room is prepared. Lyra's chambers are connected to yours. The servants will provide anything you require. Wait, Emma called as he reached the doorway. What if I can't help her? What if I make things worse? Lord Cale Draven turned back one final time, and his smile was colder than winter's heart. Then pray you die quickly, Emma Rodriguez. Because if you fail my daughter, if you betray the trust she's placed in you, you won't live long enough to regret it. The door closed behind him with the finality of a coffin lid, leaving Emma alone with a vampire princess, and the growing realization that her simple life had just become a beautiful nightmare. 5 days passed like scenes from a dream Emma couldn't wake up from. Her room was larger than her entire apartment back home, with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked gardens so perfectly maintained they looked like paintings. The bed was carved from dark wood and draped in silk that probably cost more than she made in a year. But despite the luxury, Emma felt like a bird in a golden cage. Lyra never left her side. The little girl followed Emma everywhere with the devotion of a shadow, those silver eyes constantly watching, constantly trusting. She didn't speak, not a single word, but she communicated in ways that broke Emma's heart and mended it all at once. A gentle tug on Emma's hand when she wanted to go somewhere, a small finger pointing at something that caught her interest, the way she would curl up in Emma's lap during the long afternoons, finally peaceful enough to sleep. It was the bubbles that worked the magic. Emma had asked one of the servants, a stern-faced woman named Celeste, whose eyes glowed amber in the dark, for bubble solution and plastic wands. Celeste had looked at her as if she'd requested dragon's blood. But within an hour, Emma had enough supplies to fill a toy store. The first breakthrough came on the 3rd day. They were in the estate's conservatory, a glass-roofed paradise filled with flowers that bloomed in impossible colors. Emma sat cross-legged on the marble floor, blowing streams of bubbles that caught the afternoon sunlight and scattered it into tiny rainbows. Lyra chased them with the focused intensity of a predator hunting prey. But when one particularly large bubble landed on her nose and popped with the softest sound, she giggled. The laugh was like silver bells, pure and musical, and so full of joy that Emma's eyes filled with tears. For a moment, Lyra wasn't a traumatized vampire princess, or a pawn in some supernatural war. She was just a little girl playing with bubbles. Again, Lyra whispered, her first word in 3 years coming out soft as a breath. Please. Emma blew bubbles until her cheeks ached, and Lyra's dress was damp with burst soap films. The little girl spun and danced, her platinum hair catching the light as she chased the shimmering spheres through the conservatory. Her laughter echoed off the glass walls, a sound so beautiful that even the flowers seemed to turn toward it. What Emma didn't notice was the figure watching from the shadows of the doorway. Cale stood perfectly still, his usually stern features soft with something that looked almost like wonder. The harsh lines around his silver eyes had smoothed, and for just a moment, he looked less like a vampire lord and more like a father watching his daughter play. Emma caught a glimpse of him when she turned to reach for more bubble solution, and the expression on his face made her chest tight with unexpected emotion. Vulnerability. Hope. Love so fierce it was almost painful to witness. Their eyes met across the conservatory, and for a heartbeat, something passed between them, an understanding perhaps, or the first fragile thread of connection. But by the time she blinked, he was gone, leaving only the faint scent of winter forests and the feeling that she'd witnessed something intensely private. By the 5th day, Lyra was speaking in short phrases. "Emma, look. More bubbles. Stay with me." Each word felt like a gift, a small miracle that Emma treasured. She watched the little girl transform before her eyes, from a shell-shocked ghost into a child who could smile, who could play, who could trust again. But the nights were when Emma heard things she wasn't supposed to hear. Vampire servants didn't sleep, she'd learned. They moved through the estate's corridors after midnight, their soft voices carrying conversations they thought no human could understand. But sound traveled strangely in Raven's Halt, and Emma's room was positioned perfectly to catch whispers from the servants' quarters below. The Crimson Court grows restless. She heard Celeste murmur to another servant on the 4th night. Lord Darius believes the girl's trauma makes her weak, vulnerable. "He's wrong," came the reply in a voice like grinding stone. "The young mistress carries the pure bloodline. In the right hands, she could be turned against her father." Emma pressed herself against the floor, straining to hear more. "The human complicates things," Celeste continued. "Already the child shows signs of healing. If she recovers fully, she won't live that long." "None of them will." The other voice held the coldness of grave dirt. "Lord Darius has been watching, waiting. The human has made the young mistress predictable. They know where to find her now." "When?" "Soon. The new moon is in 3 days. Darkness will be absolute, and Lord Cale will be at his weakest. The Crimson Court will strike then." Emma's blood turned to ice. They were talking about Lyra, about her. Someone was planning to use their bond as a weapon against them both. The next morning, she watched Lyra more carefully, noting details she'd missed before, how the little girl's fingers were always slightly cold, even in the warmest rooms, how her canine teeth were just a bit too sharp for a normal child, how she never seemed to eat regular food, though Celeste brought her strange concoctions that smelled of iron and herbs. Lyra was becoming more vampire with each passing day, her supernatural nature strengthening as her trauma healed. And Emma was helping it happen, nurturing the very power that made her so valuable to Cale's enemies. "Emma." Lyra's voice was still a whisper, but she spoke more now. They were in Emma's room, bubble wands and solution bottles scattered across the silk bedding. "What is it, sweetheart? Are you going to leave?" Silver eyes, wide with worry, searched Emma's face. Like Mama did, Emma's heart shattered. She pulled Lyra onto her lap, holding her close, breathing in the scent of moonlight and winter that clung to the little girl's hair. "No, baby, I'm not going anywhere." But even as she spoke the words, Emma could feel the weight of danger pressing down on them. The new moon was only 3 days away, and she had no idea how to protect the vampire princess, who had become the daughter of her heart. The attack came at dawn on the 2nd day before the new moon. Emma jolted awake to the sound of glass shattering somewhere in the estate's lower levels. For a moment, she thought it might be wind from another storm. But then she heard something that made her blood freeze. Screaming. Not human screaming, but something far more terrible. The sound of predators in mortal combat. Lyra was already sitting up in the adjoining bed, her silver eyes wide with the same primal terror Emma had first seen in the diner. The little girl's supernatural senses had detected the danger before Emma's human ones even registered it. "Emma?" Lyra whispered, her voice shaking. "They're here." More sounds reached them. Running footsteps, doors splintering, and underneath it all, a sound like wet tearing that Emma's mind refused to identify. The estate's lights flickered, then went out completely, leaving them in the gray half-light of early morning. Emma was out of bed in an instant, grabbing Lyra and pulling her toward the window. What she saw in the courtyard below made her stomach drop. Dark figures moved across the grounds with inhuman speed, their forms blurring as they cut down Cale's servants. But these weren't the graceful, controlled movements she'd grown used to seeing from the Raven's Halt vampires. These attackers moved like rabid animals, all claws and fangs and mindless violence. "The Crimson Court," Lyra breathed, pressing her face against Emma's shoulder. "They've come for me." The bedroom door exploded inward, torn from its hinges like paper. A vampire Emma had never seen before stood in the doorway, tall and lean with eyes like burning coals and blood already staining his formal jacket. His gaze locked onto Lyra with naked hunger. "Princess," he hissed, his voice like scraping bone. "Lord Darius sends his regards." Emma didn't think. She grabbed the nearest thing she could find, a heavy crystal vase, and hurled it at the vampire's head. It shattered against his skull with a satisfying crack, and while he staggered, Emma scooped up Lyra and ran. The hallways were chaos. Bodies, or what remained of them, littered the ornate carpets. Celeste lay crumpled against a wall, her amber eyes dim and lifeless. Other servants Emma had come to know were scattered like broken dolls, their formal uniforms torn and bloody. "This way," Lyra whispered urgently, tugging Emma toward what looked like a solid wall. But when the little girl pressed her hand against a carved rose in the wainscoting, a section of the wall swung inward, revealing a narrow passage. Secret tunnels. Papa showed me when I was little. For emergencies. The passage was barely wide enough for Emma's shoulders, and the darkness was absolute. She could hear Lyra's rapid breathing ahead of her, could feel the little girl trembling as sounds of battle echoed through the walls around them. Somewhere close by, something roared with inhuman rage, and the walls shook. They reached a small chamber carved from stone, probably used for storage centuries ago. A thin crack in the wall let in a sliver of light from the main corridor beyond. Emma pressed herself against it, trying to see what was happening. Cale's remaining guards were making a final stand at the main staircase. Emma recognized Marcus, the stern vampire who'd driven them from the diner, wielding what looked like a silver sword. He moved with deadly precision, cutting down attackers with centuries of skill behind each strike. But there were too many of them. Emma kept Lyra quiet, blowing soft bubbles in the darkness to keep the girl calm. Through the crack, she watched Marcus fight 3 vampires at once, his sword flashing like silver lightning. But behind him, creeping up the stairs with careful silence, was another figure Emma recognized. Victor, one of Cale's most trusted guards. Someone who'd bowed to Cale with apparent loyalty every single day. Victor raised a curved dagger, aiming for the space between Marcus's shoulder blades. Emma wanted to scream a warning, but any sound would give away their hiding place. She could only watch in horror as Victor drove the blade deep into Marcus's back. The loyal guard's eyes widened in shock and betrayal before he crumbled to the floor. "Well done," said a voice like poisoned honey. A new vampire descended the stairs, tall and elegant with silver hair and eyes like fresh blood. "Lord Cale will be so disappointed to learn of his guard's treachery." Victor bowed deeply. "Lord Darius, the princess is here somewhere. The human took her when the attack began." "Find them," Darius commanded, his voice carrying absolute authority. "The girl's trauma has made her powerful but unstable, perfect for our purposes." He smiled, revealing fangs like daggers. "And bring me the human's head." She served her usefulness. Emma's blood turned to ice. The betrayal ran deeper than she'd imagined. Victor had been feeding information to the Crimson Court for months. Every detail about Lyra's recovery, every weakness in the estate's defenses. She pulled Lyra deeper into the shadows, her mind racing. Cale was somewhere fighting. Marcus was dead. The enemy was everywhere. And the vampire princess in her arms was the prize they were all hunting for. That's when the temperature in the corridor dropped 30 degrees in a single second. The attacking vampires froze, their heads turning toward the main entrance with expressions of sudden primal fear. Even Darius took a step back, his confident demeanor cracking like ice under pressure. The front doors didn't open. They disintegrated. Lord Cale Draven walked through the ruined entrance like an avenging angel wrapped in shadows and winter wind. His formal clothes were torn and bloody, his silver hair wild from battle. And his eyes burned like twin stars gone supernova, blazing with a power so ancient and terrible that the very air around him seemed to warp and bend. Emma had never seen anything so beautiful or terrifying in her life. He moved through the attacking vampires like death incarnate, not fighting, executing. His bare hands tore through them as if they were made of paper, their ancient bodies crumbling to dust before they could even scream. Blood painted the walls in crimson arcs, and the air filled with the sound of bones snapping like kindling. In less than 30 seconds, a dozen of Darius's vampires were nothing but ash on the marble floor. "You dare?" Kyle's voice resonated with power that made the entire estate shake, chandeliers swaying overhead. "Attack my home? Murder my people? Threaten my daughter?" Darius straightened, trying to regain his composure even as his followers disintegrated around him. "The girl belongs to the old bloodlines, Kale. Your protection of her violates ancient law. She should be shared among the courts, not hidden away like—" Kale's hand closed around Darius's throat, cutting off his words. He lifted the ancient vampire off the ground with one hand, seemingly without effort. "You speak of ancient law?" Kale's voice was soft now, which somehow made it more terrifying. "I am ancient law. I was hunting and killing when your sire was still learning to feed. And you think you can take what's mine?" Through the crack in the wall, Emma watched with her hand clamped over Lyra's mouth to keep the girl silent. This was what Kale truly was, she realized with crystalline clarity. Not the controlled aristocrat or the vulnerable father she'd glimpsed in the conservatory. This, a creature of such devastating power that even other vampires feared him. A king who ruled through absolute strength. Darius clawed at Kale's arm, his face turning gray. "The Crimson Court will never stop. She is too valuable. Then I will destroy the Crimson Court," Kale said simply. "Every member, every ally, every bloodline that stands with you. I will erase you from existence so thoroughly that future generations will think you were only myth." He squeezed, and there was a sickening crack. Darius's body went limp, then began to crumble, turning to ash that drifted through Kale's fingers like sand. But Victor chose that moment to run. While Kale was distracted with Darius's death, the traitor slipped away toward a side passage, moving with the supernatural speed of a desperate vampire who knew death was coming for him. "Papa!" Lyra's cry escaped before Emma could stop her. Kale's head snapped toward their hiding place, his burning eyes finding the crack in the wall instantly. For a moment that stretched like eternity, father and daughter stared at each other through the stone barrier. The rage in Kale's eyes dimmed, replaced by something infinitely gentler. "Come out, Emma," he said, his voice returning to something almost human. "Both of you. It's over." Emma pushed open the hidden door, her legs trembling as she stepped into the blood-soaked corridor with Lyra clinging to her. Kale stood among the destruction like a dark king surveying his conquered kingdom, surrounded by ash and bodies and the lingering scent of death. When those silver eyes, still burning with residual power, fixed on her face, Emma saw her own mortality reflected there with perfect clarity. She was human, fragile, utterly defenseless against creatures who could tear her apart without effort. And this vampire, this ancient being who could destroy dozens of enemies with his bare hands, had claimed her as his own. For the first time since arriving at Raven's Halt, she truly understood what it meant to be human in a world of monsters. Kyle moved toward them, and Emma instinctively pulled Lyra closer. But when he knelt before them, his hand reaching out to touch his daughter's face with infinite tenderness, Emma saw the contradiction that he was monster and father, destroyer and protector, death and salvation all wrapped in one impossible being. "Are you hurt?" he asked softly, his eyes scanning them both for injuries. "Victor escaped," Emma said quietly, finding her voice. "He's the traitor. He killed Marcus and let them in." Kale's jaw clenched, the muscle twitching with barely suppressed violence. "I know." 2 words, but they carried the promise of death within them. He stood and began issuing orders to the surviving servants who emerged from their hiding places like ghosts. "Seal all entrances. Double the blood ward protections. Send word to the outer territories. I want every vampire in my service back at Raven's Halt within the hour." Emma watched him transform back into the cold, calculating lord, all traces of the vulnerable father disappearing behind layers of icy control. But she'd seen the truth now, and there was no going back. Emma refused to leave Lyra's side, even as Cale's servants worked to restore order to the ravaged estate. They moved through the corridors, picking up bodies, cleaning blood from marble floors, and reinforcing the shattered defenses. The little girl clung to Emma like a lifeline, her silver eyes haunted by the violence she'd witnessed. "You will return to your chambers immediately," Cale commanded, his voice brooking no argument. "Do not leave for any reason. Do not open the door for anyone except me." But hours later, as exhaustion finally claimed Emma and Lyra both, she made a mistake. A soft knock came at the door, followed by a familiar voice. "Miss Rodriguez? Lord Cale sent me to check on you and the young mistress." It was Victor. Emma's blood ran cold, but before she could react, the door exploded inward. Victor moved with terrifying speed, crossing the room in a blur. His hand closed around Emma's throat, lifting her off the ground with inhuman strength. "You've caused me so much trouble, human," he hissed, his eyes glowing red with rage. "If you'd never come here, the girl would still be broken, useless to her father. Perfect for our plans." Emma clawed at his hand, her lungs screaming for air. Black spots danced across her vision. She could see Lyra frozen in terror on the bed, her mouth open in a silent scream. The same trauma response from the diner threatening to consume her again. "Lord Darius wanted you dead," Victor continued, his grip tightening. "And I always complete my assignments." Emma's vision tunneled. She felt herself fading, felt the darkness pulling her under. The last thing she saw before unconsciousness claimed her was Victor moving toward Lyra, and the little girl's silver eyes going blank with shock. When Emma woke, pain exploded through her throat with every breath. Her neck was bruised purple, and each swallow felt like swallowing glass. But worse than the physical pain was the silence. The terrible, empty silence. Lyra was gone. Emma stumbled from the bed, her legs barely supporting her. The room was destroyed, furniture overturned, curtains torn, clear signs of struggle. She staggered into the hallway and found Kyle standing at the window of the main hall, his back rigid with tension. Around him, his remaining servants stood in terrified silence. "Where is she?" Emma's voice came out as a broken rasp. Kyle turned slowly, and Emma recoiled at what she saw in his eyes. Not just rage, devastation, the kind of pain that could break even an immortal being. "The Sanctum of Shadows," he said, his voice hollow. "An ancient cathedral 40 miles north. Victor took her there. They're preparing the binding ritual." "What ritual?" "They will bind Lyra's power to their bloodline," Cale explained, each word seeming to cost him. "Use her abilities to create an army of vampires with pure Draven blood. She'll be nothing but a vessel, her mind destroyed completely by the dark magic." His hands clenched into fists. "My daughter will become a living weapon for my enemies." Emma moved toward him, ignoring the pain in her throat. "Then we go get her back." "We?" Cale's silver eyes fixed on her with something like disbelief. "You're human. Fragile. You nearly died tonight. What use could you possibly be?" "I'm the only one who can keep her calm," Emma said fiercely. "You saw what happened at the diner, what happened in the conservatory. When she's terrified, when the trauma takes over, I'm the only one who can bring her back." She stepped closer, meeting his ancient gaze with mortal determination. "You need me, Lord Draven. And she needs me." Kyle stared at her for a long moment, something shifting in those silver depths. Respect, perhaps. Or the desperate hope of a father who'd already lost too much. "The ritual begins at moonrise," he said finally. "We have 3 hours. The sanctum will be guarded by what remains of the Crimson Court. At least 24 ancient vampires, all trained warriors." His voice dropped to a whisper. "I can kill them all, but I cannot reach my daughter in time if she loses herself to panic. If the trauma consumes her before I can stop the ritual, then I'll reach her," Emma said simply. "I'll blow bubbles in the middle of hell itself if that's what it takes to save her." For the first time since she'd met him, Cale smiled. A real smile. small and fragile and heartbreakingly human. "Then we leave now," he said, extending his hand. "And pray we're not too late." Emma took his hand, feeling the supernatural cold of his skin against her own warmth. Together, the Vampire King and the human waitress prepared to storm the gates of an ancient cathedral, for a little girl who'd taught them both what it meant to love. The Sanctum of Shadows rose from the abandoned countryside like a monument to forgotten gods. The cathedral was ancient, its black stone walls covered in moss and carved with symbols that predated modern language. Gargoyles lined the roof, their eyes seeming to follow Cale's car as it approached through the dying light of dusk. "They know we're coming," Cale said, his silver eyes scanning the perimeter. "Victor will have told them to expect me." Emma clutched the bottle of bubble solution in her pocket like a talisman. Her throat still ached from Victor's attack, but she pushed the pain aside. Lyra was in there, terrified and alone, and nothing else mattered. "How do we get inside?" Kyle's smile was cold and sharp as a blade. "Through the front door." He didn't wait for a response. He simply walked toward the massive cathedral entrance, and Emma had no choice but to follow. The doors were easily 15 feet tall, made of iron reinforced with what looked like silver symbols meant to ward against supernatural threats. Kyle placed one hand against the metal, and Emma felt power surge through the air. Ancient, terrible, absolute. The doors exploded inward with a sound like thunder, metal tearing like paper. "Lord Cale Draven," a voice echoed from within the cathedral's vast interior. "We've been expecting you." They stepped inside, and Emma's breath caught. The cathedral's interior had been transformed into something out of a nightmare. Black candles lined every surface, their flames burning with unnatural purple light. And everywhere, on the walls, the floor, the vaulted ceiling, were vampires. At least 24 of them, all dressed in crimson robes, all with eyes that glowed like coals in the darkness. At the center of it all, on an altar carved from obsidian, lay Lyra. The little girl was unconscious. Her platinum hair spread around her like a halo. Dark energy spiraled around her small body, forming patterns that hurt to look at directly. Victor stood at her head, one hand resting possessively on her shoulder, while other robed figures chanted in a language that made Emma's teeth ache. "The binding has already begun," Victor called out, his voice triumphant. "Even if you kill us all, Draven, it's too late. The ritual cannot be stopped once started. Your daughter will belong to the Crimson Court by moonrise." Kyle's response was to move. Emma had seen him fight at Raven's Halt, had witnessed his devastating power, but this was something else entirely. He became a force of nature, a storm of violence and rage that tore through the cathedral like a hurricane through paper houses. Vampires lunged at him from all directions, their centuries of combat experience meaningless against his ancient fury. He tore through them with hands that moved too fast to see, leaving only ash and screaming in his wake. The cathedral shook, massive stone pillars cracking under the pressure of power being unleashed. "Now!" Cale's voice cut through the chaos, directed at Emma. "Go to her now!" Emma ran. While Kyle drew the attention of every vampire in the cathedral, she slipped through the destruction like a shadow. Bodies, or what remained of them, littered her path. The purple flames cast everything in sickly light, and the chanting grew louder, more frenzied. She reached the altar just as Lyra's eyes flew open. But they weren't silver anymore. They were completely white, blank with terror and dark magic. The little girl's mouth opened in that same silent scream Emma had seen in the diner, and the dark energy around her intensified, responding to her panic. "No," one of the robed figures hissed, moving to intercept Emma. "The human cannot interfere." Cale appeared behind the vampire like death incarnate, his hand punching through the creature's chest and ripping out something that turned to ash. "Touch her, and you'll beg for death before I give it to you." Emma reached Lyra, her hands shaking as she pulled out the bottle of bubble solution. Behind her, the battle raged, Kyle fighting 12 vampires at once, the cathedral crumbling around them, Victor screaming orders that no one followed because they were too busy dying. But Emma focused on only one thing. She unscrewed the bottle, dipped the wand, and blew. Bubbles floated through the chaos, perfect, shimmering spheres of rainbow light, that seemed impossibly delicate against the backdrop of violence and dark magic. They drifted toward Lyra's face, popping softly against her cheeks, her nose, her closed eyelids. "Hey, baby girl," Emma whispered, her voice raw but gentle. "I'm here. You're safe. Watch the bubbles, sweetheart. Just watch the bubbles." She kept blowing, creating islands of beauty in the midst of horror. And slowly, impossibly, Lyra's white eyes began to clear. "Emma?" Lyra's voice was barely audible over the sounds of battle, but it was her voice, not the silent scream of trauma, not the blank terror. "Her. That's right, baby," Emma whispered, blowing more bubbles. They floated around them like protective shields, their rainbow surfaces reflecting the purple flames into something almost beautiful. "I've got you. We're going to be okay." Lyra's small hand reached up, her fingers passing through a cluster of bubbles. When they popped against her palm, she smiled. A real smile. Genuine and full of wonder despite the nightmare surrounding them. And that's when everything changed. The dark energy spiraling around Lyra began to flicker and sputter like a candle in wind. The chanting vampires faltered, their voices breaking as the ritual's power started to unravel. The symbols carved into the obsidian altar cracked, thin lines spreading across the black stone like spider webs. "No!" Victor's scream was raw with rage and disbelief. "It's impossible. The binding requires only fear and trauma, emotions the girl has in abundance." But he was wrong. Emma understood it now with perfect clarity. The ritual had been designed for the broken, traumatized Lyra, the child consumed by terror and grief. But that wasn't who Lyra was anymore. Over the past days, Emma had given her something the Crimson Court never anticipated. Hope, love, trust, joy. The dark magic had no hold on a child who could smile at bubbles while hell raged around her. It shattered like glass, the purple flames guttering out in a wave that spread across the cathedral. The remaining robed vampires screamed as the backlash of broken magic consumed them, turning them to ash where they stood. Victor staggered back from the altar, his face twisted with fury. "You've destroyed everything. Months of planning, centuries of preparation, ruined by a human and her stupid bubbles." He lunged at Emma with inhuman speed, his claws extended to tear her throat out. But he never reached her. Cale appeared between them like a shadow given form. His hand caught Victor's wrist mid-strike, stopping the traitor's momentum with terrifying ease. "You betrayed me," Cale said, his voice soft and cold as winter death. "Murdered my people. Sold information to my enemies. And worst of all, you touched my daughter. Tried to destroy her mind with your pathetic ritual." Victor struggled, but he might as well have been fighting against a mountain. "She belongs to the old bloodlines. The pure power shouldn't be hoarded by one. She belongs to no one," Cale interrupted, his silver eyes burning with that terrible inner fire. "She is my daughter. She is under my protection. And you are already dead. You just don't know it yet." What happened next was too fast for Emma's human eyes to follow. One moment Victor was whole, the next he was screaming as Cale's power tore through him. But unlike the others, Cale didn't grant him a quick death. He made it last, made it hurt, made it a lesson to anyone who might ever think of threatening the Draven bloodline again. When Victor finally crumbled to ash, the cathedral fell silent, except for the sound of stones settling and Emma's ragged breathing. Lyra sat up on the altar, her silver eyes clear and bright. She looked at Emma, then at her father, and whispered 3 words that made Emma's heart break and heal at the same time. "Papa. Emma. Home." Kyle moved to the altar with supernatural speed, gathering his daughter into his arms with a tenderness that seemed impossible from someone who'd just torn through dozens of enemies. He held her like she was made of spun glass, his face buried in her platinum hair. "Yes, little star," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion that Emma had never heard from him before. "We're going home." Outside the ruined cathedral, the moon rose full and bright, casting silver light across the abandoned countryside. Cale's reinforcements had arrived, dozens of vampires loyal to the Draven bloodline, securing the perimeter and ensuring no Crimson Court survivors remained. Emma carried her bottle of bubble solution, now half empty, and followed Cale through the destruction they'd left behind. Her throat ached, her body trembled with exhaustion and adrenaline crash, but none of it mattered. They'd won. Lyra was safe, and somehow, impossibly, they'd become something like a family in the process. The cathedral steps were cold beneath Emma's feet as she carried Lyra into the clean night air. Behind them, the sanctum of shadows burned with purple fire as the remnants of dark magic consumed what was left of the ancient structure. Kale's reinforcements had secured the perimeter, at least 50 vampires loyal to the Draven bloodline, all dressed in black and moving with military precision. Emma's legs finally gave out halfway down the steps, and she sank onto the cold stone with Lyra still cradled in her arms. The little girl had fallen asleep, exhausted from the ritual's aftermath, her platinum hair catching the moonlight like spun silver. She looked peaceful now, her face relaxed in a way Emma had never seen before. Not just calm, but truly at peace. The adrenaline that had carried Emma through the battle was fading, replaced by trembling exhaustion and the delayed shock of everything they'd survived. Her hands shook as she smoothed Lyra's hair, and tears she hadn't allowed herself to shed finally spilled down her cheeks. She'd almost lost her. They'd almost destroyed this precious child's mind forever. A shadow fell across them, and Emma looked up to find Kale standing over her. His clothes were torn and stained with blood, none of it his own, and ash still clung to his dark hair. But his silver eyes were fixed on his daughter with an expression so tender it made Emma's chest ache. Without a word, he lowered himself to sit beside them on the steps. Not above them, not standing in that position of lordly authority. Beside them, as an equal, he reached out one hand, hesitating for just a moment before touching Lyra's cheek with infinite gentleness. "I thought I'd lost her," he said quietly, his voice raw with emotion. "When Victor took her, when I saw her on that altar with the dark magic consuming her," his voice broke. And for the first time, Emma saw the ancient vampire king as he truly was beneath all the power and control. A father who loved his daughter more than his own immortal existence. "I would have burned the world to ash to get her back." "I know," Emma whispered. Kyle's silver eyes lifted to meet hers, and in them, she saw gratitude, respect, and something deeper that made her breath catch. "You saved her, not with power or violence or ancient magic, but with bubbles and kindness and a love that asked for nothing in return." He shook his head slowly, wonder crossing his features. "How does a human possess such strength?" "She needed me," Emma said simply. "That's all the strength I needed." Kale was quiet for a long moment, his hand still resting gently on his sleeping daughter's face. Then he stood, his commanding presence returning as he turned to face the assembled vampires surrounding them. "My people," his voice carried across the ruined grounds with that resonant authority Emma had first heard in the diner. Every vampire bowed their heads in respect. "Tonight, we faced betrayal from within and assault from without. We lost loyal servants and trusted guards. But we also witnessed something I have not seen in my 8 centuries of existence." He gestured toward Emma, and suddenly dozens of glowing eyes were fixed on her. She resisted the urge to shrink back, holding Lyra closer instead. This human woman, with no supernatural power, no ancient blood, no weapon but her compassion, broke a binding ritual that should have been unbreakable. She walked into hell itself to save my daughter. She gave Lyra something I could not, hope strong enough to shatter dark magic. Kale knelt before Emma again, this time placing one hand over his heart in a gesture that made every vampire present gasp. "Emma Rodriguez, from this moment forward, you are no longer human in the eyes of vampire law. You are Draven. You are family. You are bound to this bloodline as surely as if you shared our blood." His silver eyes burned with intensity. "My home is your home. My resources are yours. My protection is absolute. And anyone who threatens you threatens the entire Draven line." Emma's eyes widened. "Kale, what are you accepting?" He interrupted gently. "You're accepting the highest honor I can bestow. The only way I can truly protect you in our world." His voice dropped to a whisper only she could hear. "The only way I can keep you with us. With me." The assembled vampires struck their chests in unison, the sound echoing like thunder. "House Draven," they cried in perfect harmony. Blood and shadow. Emma looked down at Lyra, sleeping peacefully in her arms. Then up at Cale, whose ancient eyes held a vulnerability that took her breath away. She'd come to Raven's Halt as a prisoner, but somewhere between bubbles and bloodshed, between terror and tenderness, she'd found something she'd been searching for her entire life. A family, a purpose, a home. "I accept," she whispered, and the Vampire King smiled. The journey back to Raven's Halt took place in silence. Emma sat in the back of Kyle's car, with Lyra sleeping peacefully in her lap. The little girl's breathing soft and steady. Through the tinted windows, she watched the landscape transform from desolate wilderness back to civilization, though she wondered if she'd ever see the world the same way again. How could she, knowing what lurked in the shadows? Knowing that vampires walked among humans, ancient and powerful, playing games with mortal lives like chess pieces on a board. But when she looked down at Lyra's peaceful face, none of that mattered. This child, this precious, traumatized little girl who'd learned to smile again, was worth every terrifying moment. They arrived at Raven's Halt, just as the first hints of dawn touched the eastern horizon. The estate had been cleaned and restored with supernatural efficiency, all traces of the morning's violence erased as if it had never happened. Only the missing faces told the story. Servants who would never bow again. Guards who'd given their lives defending their lord's home. Cale carried Lyra to her chambers, and Emma followed, her exhausted body running on pure willpower now. He laid his daughter in her bed with infinite care, tucking silk blankets around her small form. For a long moment, he simply stood there watching her sleep, his hand resting gently on her platinum hair. "She'll be different when she wakes," he said quietly. The ritual, even though it failed, changed something in her, broke through the last barriers her trauma had built. He looked at Emma, his silver eyes luminous in the dim light. "She'll be able to speak freely now, to trust, to heal completely, because of you." Emma's throat tightened with emotion. "I didn't do anything special. You loved her," Kyle interrupted, moving closer. "Without condition, without fear, without expecting anything in return. Do you have any idea how rare that is? Especially in our world where everything is transaction and power and ancient debts." He reached out, his fingers ghosting along her bruised throat where Victor had tried to strangle her. His touch was cold but gentle, and Emma shivered. "I could have lost you both tonight," he whispered. "And I realized something as I tore through that cathedral, searching for my daughter while knowing you were in danger too." His hand moved to cup her face, thumb brushing her cheek with surprising tenderness. "I realized that somewhere between the diner and this moment, you became essential, not just to Lyra, to me." Emma's breath caught. "Kyle, I'm giving you a choice, Emma Rodriguez," he said, his ancient eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her knees weak. "At dawn, I can have my people take you back to your old life. Give you money, protection, a new start somewhere far from here. You'll be safe, comfortable, free to live however you choose." He paused, something vulnerable flickering across his perfect features. "Or you can stay. Help me raise Lyra in a world that will always be dangerous. Deal with vampire politics and ancient bloodlines and enemies who will see you as a weakness to exploit." His thumb traced her jawline, and Emma realized she was leaning into his touch. "If you stay," Cale continued, his voice dropping to barely a whisper, "you'll never be just human again. You'll be Draven. Mine. Protected by forces that have existed for centuries, but also trapped by them. Your simple life will be gone forever, replaced by something infinitely more complicated." His smile was small, almost sad. "I'm offering you a beautiful nightmare, Emma, and I won't blame you if you run." Emma looked past him to where Lyra slept, her face peaceful in a way it hadn't been since Emma first met her. She thought about the diner, about wiping down coffee-stained counters at 3 a.m, about going home to an empty apartment where no one waited and no one cared. Then she thought about Lyra's laugh when bubbles popped against her nose, the way the little girl whispered, "Emma," like a prayer, the feeling of being needed, being essential, being loved for the first time in years. And she thought about Cale, this ancient, powerful, terrifying vampire king who'd shown her glimpses of the father beneath the monster, who looked at her like she was something precious, who'd offered her not just protection, but belonging. "I'm not going anywhere," Emma said firmly, covering his hand with her own. "Lyra needs me, and honestly, I need her too. I need this. Whatever this is between us." She smiled, feeling tears prick her eyes. "You said I'm Draven now, so let me be Draven. Let me stay." Something shifted in Kale's expression. Relief, joy, wonder, all mixed together in a way that made him look almost human, almost vulnerable. "Then stay," he whispered, pulling her closer. "Stay and help me raise my daughter. Stay and drive me insane with your compassion and your bubbles and your impossible human strength." His forehead touched hers, his breath cold against her lips. "Stay and let me spend centuries showing you what it means to be loved by something immortal." "Centuries?" Emma's voice trembled. "I'm human, Kyle. I have maybe 50 years if I'm lucky. Do you think I would claim you as Draven without ensuring you could stay?" His smile was sharp and possessive. "There are ways, Emma. Ancient rituals less destructive than what the Crimson Court attempted. Ways to extend your life, to give you time measured in centuries instead of decades." His eyes burned into hers. "If you'll trust me, if you'll let me keep you." Emma should have been terrified, should have run screaming from the implications of what he was offering. But all she felt was relief and rightness, and the bone-deep certainty that this impossible, dangerous, beautiful thing was exactly where she belonged. "I trust you," she whispered. Kale kissed her then, soft and gentle and full of promises that would take lifetimes to fulfill. And as dawn broke over Raven's Halt, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Emma understood that her life had truly begun the moment a terrified little girl stumbled into her diner. Their love story, born from bubbles and bloodshed, would be written in moonlight for centuries to come. And Emma Rodriguez, former waitress, now daughter of House Draven, had never been more certain of anything in her life. She was finally, impossibly, home.